Let's go! Batter up! We're taking the afternoon off. It's a beautiful day for a ball game today. The fans are out to get a ticket or two. From Walla Walla, Washington to Kalamazoo. It's a beautiful day for a home run, but even a triple's okay. We're gonna cheer and boo and raise a hullabaloo at the ball game today.
Hey everybody, it's me, Rick Acosta, the Dodger Card Collector, coming to you with another video. And today is Saturday, July 15th, 2023. Today is a major anniversary in my life. No, it's not my birthday. Don't be sending me cards in the mail. Nothing like that. But 50 years ago today, I went to my very first baseball game at Dodger Stadium. And it brings back a lot of memories, and I wanted to talk to you guys about it. And I'm going to do something a little different today, but I'm going to talk about my experience at my very first baseball game, and hopefully it's something you can all relate to. So I'm going to turn the camera around right away so we could talk about this day. Okay, and I have a little bit of a different backdrop today for today's show. As I mentioned to you, my first game was 50 years ago on July 15th. It was the Dodgers versus the Cubs. I just wanted to give you guys a little bit of a background about me and my life and where I was and how I became a baseball fan. And hopefully it's something that will bring back memories for you, because I know it brought back a lot of memories for me. I'd started listening to baseball games in 1971 at the age of 6 years old. My parents, they bought me a transistor radio for Christmas that year, and I listened to Vin Scully and Jerry Doggett announce the Dodger games every night. I'd listen to the game on my radio in my bedroom, and I'd usually end up falling asleep before the game had ended. My mother would come check on me every night before she went to bed, and she'd always notice the radio was still on. She'd turn the radio off every night. And I didn't learn until many years later that my mom let me know that she'd always check what I was listening to each night. And she always noticed it was a baseball game. By the end of the 71 season, I was completely crazy about baseball. The Dodgers had finished one game back of the Giants that year in the National League West race. And it was just so exciting watching them play every night. By 1973, I must have been hinting to my family a lot that I wanted to go to a baseball game. I was 8 years old, still hadn't been to a game in person, but by this point, and I was fortunate enough to grow up, well, back then, Los Angeles was the National League town, but it was also an American League town because we had the California Angels playing. So it was a big deal back then. When one of the teams was away, the other one would be home. So I was watching a lot of Dodger games on KTTV channel 11, and I was watching the Angel games on KTLA channel 5, and I would watch the Game of the Week on NBC channel 4, and I was constantly watching baseball. Now, my family, we weren't rich. We were a family of immigrants, and I think looking back, my parents, I honestly think the reason I hadn't gone to a baseball game was at 8 years old, because my parents really didn't think about taking me to a baseball game. One day, my dad and I were playing catch in the front yard, and all of a sudden he said to me one day, "We should go to a Dodger game soon." And just hearing that, I was thrilled. So finally one day, I remember my dad and I driving to Sears, and they had a Ticketron outlet. Now, for those of you who are saying, what's Ticketron? It was before Ticketmaster, before Live Nation. It was a place where you'd go and you would buy tickets for sporting events and concerts. And in this case, we bought 4 tickets to a Dodger game. We were in the field level on a Sunday afternoon, and our tickets were just past first base. And it was helmet weekend. Back then, the Dodgers had this promotion, helmet weekend, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. Every child in attendance under 12 or under 14 would receive a free Dodger batting helmet. And please, keep in mind, this was a completely different era of fandom that exists today. I had no Dodger gear or swag whatsoever. Getting a helmet would be the first time I would have anything of the Dodgers that I could wear. So my dad and my brother and my cousin and I, we'd all be attending, and I was extremely excited for the game. Now, that day of the game finally arrived, and it was a Sunday, and those of you who have been to Dodger Stadium know that getting to the stadium isn't the easiest, not even in 1973. And naturally, my dad got lost along the way on the freeway. We finally went through an alternative parking entrance that was going up a hill, and when my father made this turn around the corner, the hill suddenly disappeared, and there it was right in front of me, Dodger Stadium. In all its glory, it was so big. I was just awestruck as we parked our car and walked to the stadium. So we gave our tickets to the ticket guy, and he let us in, and I was handed a Dodger blue helmet with the LA on the front of the helmet, just like the one the players wore. That was my mentality back then. I actually now owned my very first Dodger helmet. I was excited. Just telling you guys about it, it brings back a lot of memories. And we sat in our seats, as I mentioned to you, we were in the field level. And if you've ever seen City Slickers with Billy Crystal, when he described going to Yankee Stadium, that's how I felt going to Dodger Stadium. The field was so colorful. It was green, the green grass. Now, the infield didn't look brown. Back then, the Dodgers had almost like a dark red clay for their infield, but they had a light blue outfield wall, yellow seats in the outfield, palm trees, purple hills in the background. It was a perfect Southern California day, and I swear I had died and gone to heaven. This was where I was supposed to be. And at that time, though, I did not realize that this would be the first of hundreds of visits to Dodger Stadium. Now, I saw the players warming up, and eventually the game started. A few days before the game, I had asked my brother if we were going to hear Vin Scully at the game. He said no. At a baseball game, there was only the PA announcer, and we wouldn't hear anything else. Now, I remember being very disappointed. I didn't know how I was going to follow the game without him. I was already used to my new friend, Mr. Vinny, telling me about baseball. The Dodgers then the Dodgers finally came out on the field, and the organ played "Charge" as the Dodgers ran on the field. And all of a sudden, once the game started, I started to hear a buzz in my seats surrounding me. And then all of a sudden I started hearing the speakers were turned up from various locations all over our section and the adjacent sections. All of a sudden I started hearing more speakers from the hot dog and the souvenir stands. They were playing the Dodger game on the radio. I could now hear Vin Scully announcing the game just like I was at home, but now I was at Dodger Stadium. I was just ecstatic at this point. Now, the Dodgers won that game 9-3. It was the memory of a lifetime. I have very few memories of the actual game, but I will talk to you about those in a moment. My father and I'll be honest, and you guys have probably heard this, I didn't have much of a relationship with my dad while we were together. But that day we were good. And my brother and I, we went to many games in many different stadiums after that. And we had a lot of great memories going. We went to opening day every year, and we sat together and just talked and had a good time. And those memories, they're going to live with me forever. Our last game together was in Cleveland in 2019. And I think Indians or now Guardian fans will be able to, they knew this way before I ever did. But to this day, when I hear the McCoys singing Hang On Sloopy, I just want to scream, O-H-I-O, just like all the Indians fans did that day. My father and my brother are gone now, but I do remember that day 50 years ago as if it were just yesterday. And the love I feel for the beautiful game of baseball and my team, the Dodgers, exists to this day. So, thanks for letting me ramble for a little while, guys. Here are some cards. So I'm going to feature some cards from the 1973 top set. On the left is the Dodger team card that has the team picture. And then on the back, they had Dodger team records at that point. And then it has their pennant winning seasons in regards to standings. That was the team card. And then this was the Dodger team checklist. These cards I never saw back in 1973. I think these were released at a later time, or they were only on the East Coast. But this was a team checklist. And honestly, the reason I loved this card, some of you might remember in 1974, these cards were released, excuse me, with a red border. But I thought all of the autographs were amazing. So here are the Dodgers from 1973. And that day, they played the Chicago Cubs. And here's the Cubs team card, along with the team checklist. Now, the great thing about the Cubs card, this is a very unique card. And those of you that are set builders know this just from looking at it. The Cubs rarely offered a team card as a team picture. They always had the floating heads. Look back through all the years in the 70s and from some of the 60s, the Cubs always offered floating heads. So I thought this was a great card to show off. It's very unique. I think it's, look at the Cubs logos back then. They were just a little different. And like the Dodgers, they have their team records, their pennant winning seasons. And then here's their team checklist. These are inserts, by the way, guys. These don't count as part of the 1973 set. I happen to get them all, and I do store them with my 1973 collection. So here are the Chicago Cubs. The managers that day were Hall of Famer Walter Alston. He was probably like in around his 20th season by this point. Alston was famous for, I think he either had I think he might have played in one game or had one at bat in the majors and never did anything else. He became the Dodger manager in 1954 and won World Series in 1955, 1959, 1963, and 1965. He also had some National League pennants in there. And he was famous for Dodger owner Walter O'Malley did not believe in signing his managers to multi-year contracts. So Alston basically signed like 22, 23 consecutive one-year contracts. He managed until the late until 1976. And by that point, depending on who you talk to, I think he might have kind of gotten pushed out because future Hall of Fame manager Tommy Lasorda is featured in this card, along with one-time Dodger Jim Gilliam and longtime coaches Monty Basgall and Red Adams. And then on the back here, you get these little bios, little stats of the Dodger coaches and manager. Now, the Cubs, they were managed by former player Whitey Lockman. He took over for Leo Durocher around 1972. He didn't last with the Cubs very long. I think he might have been, I think by 1974, he was already gone. But the thing I really like about this card is that it features recently retired Ernie Banks. So that's technically my first Ernie Banks card. And then former Dodger Pete Reiser is on the bottom here. So, and then Hank Aguirre and Larry Jansen round out the coaches. I do like it when the coaches are included on the cards because you see some great players. I think this set from 1973, Warren Spahn is the pitching coach for the Indians. So those are the two managers that day, Walter Alston and Whitey Lockman. The starting pitchers that day for the Cubs were Rick Russell, and for the Dodgers, Claude Osteen. Rick Russell was at the beginning of a very long baseball career at this point. His first full season with the Cubs was in 1972. He had a record of 10-8. 1973, he finished the season 14-15. He would have some really good years. He'd have some good years with the Cubs. In 1977, he won 20 games. Eventually, he got bounced around a lot between the Pirates. And then all of a sudden, he got hot again, like in the late 80s with the Giants, winning 19 games in 1988 and 17 games in 1989. He did finish his career with 214 wins, had a good career. And that was the starting pitcher for the Cubs that day. The Dodgers had veteran left-hander Claude Osteen. He was starting roughly, I think, his 9th season with the Dodgers by this point. He had been in the league since 1959 or 1960. The Dodgers got him from the Washington Senators for Frank Howard. Some people might view that as a mistake, but Claude Osteen had some good years with the Dodgers, and the Dodgers have always been a little bit more focused on pitching than hitting. And at the time also, Frank Howard wasn't really happy with he wasn't really happy as a baseball player. He was thinking of retiring, and the Dodgers traded him to Washington, and that's really where, Frank Howard took off and started hitting all those home runs. But Claude Osteen, like I mentioned, he had a lot of great years, lasted through the 73 season. Actually, yeah, this would be his last season with the Dodgers, because after 1973, he was traded to the Houston Astros for Jimmy Wynn. And Jimmy Wynn became one of my favorite players. But here are the starting pitchers for that day. Now, two pitchers who didn't pitch that day, but I thought I can't just ignore these guys that they weren't at the game that day. Hall of Famer Fergie Jenkins, along with Hall of Famer Don Sutton. They were both their respective aces, probably, of the staff by this point. Fergie Jenkins had 7 out of 8. The last 7 of 8 years, he had 20 wins. 1973, which is pictured here, that was the one year he didn't win 20 games. He won 14, and it would turn out to be his last season with the Cubs. He eventually be traded to Texas. Don Sutton was still in the middle of an illustrious career with the Dodgers, which eventually would lead him to 300 victories and a couple of 20-game win seasons. And at the time, I looked at Don Sutton as, wow, that was the guy, that guy played with Sandy Koufax and Don Drysdale. He was our connection to those guys. So I wanted to talk to you about these guys. One of the things I noticed interesting about the Cubs, and you'll see this in a few cards, are their road uniforms. Look how it said Chicago and then it had their number. I think it's a little cheesy, but at the time it was kind of cool too. So, and then the Dodgers uniforms, these are from 71 actually, and part of 72 where they had stripes going down their shoulders and their arm, kind of like the Phillies. They only wore those for a year or two. This picture was taken at Vero Beach, I can tell. But two Hall of Famers who I did not get to see pitch that day. Eventually, I would get to see them pitch at other games I attended later in my life. The infield of Steve Garvey, Davey Lopes, Bill Russell, and Ron Cey had made their debut about 2 weeks earlier from the game that I attended. At the time, the infield consisted of Bill Buckner at first base, then Davey Lopes at second, Bill Russell at short, Ron Cey at third. Walter Alston noticed Garvey had a hot bat, tried him out at first base. He asked Steve Garvey if he knew how to play first base. Garvey lied and said yes, and ended up playing at first base. And for the next 8.5 seasons, this was the starting infield for the Dodgers that played all those years together. And these guys were this was the core group of the people of the team that I watched growing up. They played. It just seemed like they played every day, every game I went to. they were the infield. And Ron Cey was my favorite player. And on his card, that guy to the right, Mike Schmidt, was probably my favorite player who didn't play for the Dodgers. I thought he was a great player. But here they are in their 1973 card. Their 1973 cards. Steve Garvey, a lot of people talk about that card. It really looks like a Wes Parker card. That's the beauty of the 1973 set. I know there are people out there who don't like it, but I think it's a great set. In the 60s and even in the 70s, I always, looking back, I wonder, why did the Cubs win? They had a lot of talent. And even, Ernie Banks had been gone for a couple of years, but in looking at their outfield in 1973, Billy Williams in left, Rick Monday in center, Jose Cardenal in right. Solid outfield. Billy Williams had an illustrious career, eventually went on to the Baseball Hall of Fame. One of the great, I remember growing up, he had just won the batting title in 72. And he was one of the great, one of the really great players in my early childhood. Rick Monday, I knew him more when he got traded to the Dodgers. He got traded to the Dodgers in 1976 for Bill Buckner. Had some good years, had some actually really good years with the A's and the Cubs and the Dodgers. He went on to become the Dodger radio announcer. He's still there. He's still here to this day. I just heard him tonight against the Mets. And then Jose Cardenal. Jose Cardenal had been bouncing around, but he had some solid years with the Cubs in the early to mid 70s. And he managed to put some good years together. My one memory of Jose Cardenal is that I'm a big fan of the band Pearl Jam. And Eddie Vedder, the lead singer, Jose Cardenal was his favorite player on the Cubs growing up. So I've been to one Cubs game in Chicago. That was in Wrigley Field, obviously. This was in 2010. And the day I went, Eddie Vedder was selected to sing Take Me Out to the Ball Game. And he was also selected to throw out the first pitch. And he wanted to throw out the first pitch to Jose Cardenal. So that's what he did. And when it was time to sing Take Me Out to the Ball Game, who joined him? Jose Cardenal. So there's my memory of Jose Cardenal. He was a good ball player, but since Eddie Vedder, that was his favorite player, I definitely got to bring it up. Now, I also have to talk about these two guys because I don't remember anything they did that day, but Willie Davis was probably arguably the best player on the Dodgers at this point. He'd been on the team now for 12 years, put up good offensive numbers, was playing in center field. He was the real veteran of the team by this point. The Dodgers were getting really young, but they still had Willie Davis. And this turned out to be his last year with the Dodgers. He was eventually traded to the Montreal Expos in a deal that brought a relief pitcher, Mike Marshall, to the Dodgers. And Mike Marshall ended up winning the Cy Young Award in 1974. Hall of Famer Ron Santo, I know he played in the game. I can't tell you anything he did out of memory. I mean, I could tell you by looking things up. But he was there that day, that's for sure. And he had a Hall of Fame career. He played with the Cubs from 1961 to 1973. This would also be his last year with the Chicago Cubs. He'd be traded the next season to the crosstown rival Chicago White Sox. So here are Willie Davis. I still don't get what's happening in his card, and I believe that's Tim McCarver, who's the catcher. And there's Ron Santo. Now, the last two guys I'm going to bring up, you're going to go, why is he showing us cards of Ken Rudolph and Willie Crawford? And that's because they made two plays that I actually do remember happening that day. Just to give you a little background, as a child, I suffered from headaches, especially if I was outside. I was one of those kids that ran around in the hot sun without thinking and not drinking water and until I got violently ill. So I remember even at the age of 8 going to Dodger Stadium, I was nervous of starting to have headaches at the baseball game. And sure enough, I felt hot. I didn't feel well. I didn't want to say anything because I was afraid my dad would make us go home. So I sat there a little uneasy, even though I was having a good time. And somewhere around the 4th inning, I started to feel better. And you might say, how do you remember when you felt better? I remember because Ken Rudolph came to the plate and he hit into a 5-6-3 double play. Ball hit to Davey Lopes. There was a man on first. Lopes tossed the ball to Bill Russell at short, who was covering second base. He threw to Steve Garvey for the out, and the stadium just went crazy. That was my memory of the stadium going crazy. But I do remember I felt better at that point, right before it happened. And that was when I realized how happy I was to be at this baseball game. So that was my memory of Ken Rudolph. Now, Willie Crawford, what's my memory of him? He hit a 3-run home run, and I actually remembered that. That was the only home run that day, and there were 2 men on base, and he hit a ball in the left center field, and when it went over the fence, I just started screaming, and naturally, the way everybody does, everybody just stood up and started applauding, and so it was a great memory because that was my first home run. Willie Crawford hit the first home run of my baseball career. So I thought I would acknowledge him. Willie Crawford played about 10 years for the Dodgers, from 1965 to like 1974, 1975. Eventually he was, I know he was traded to the Cardinals. I can't tell you who he was traded for. I don't think it was Reggie Smith, but I have good memories based on those are the only 2 plays I remembered from that day. So through the beauty of the internet, I actually have some mementos of this game. I bought these recently. These aren't something that I've carried for the last 50 years, but through the power of eBay, I was able to find a ticket from that day, from July 15th. These people were seated in the orange level down the third base line. So I was a little lower, but I was down the right field line. And the game started Sunday, July 15th at 2 p.m. I don't remember the Dodgers starting games at 2 p.m., but obviously it was. So I was able to pick up this ticket. And then also, this is the actual program from that day. And the person that bought this card, I'm going to see if I can put this on the screen, they actually wrote the date of the game. I bought several programs from this person on eBay, and they dated all their programs. So here we see the infield of Bill Russell, Davey Lopes, Ron Cey, and Bill Buckner. That was the plan at the time. It wasn't supposed to be Steve Garvey. I'm going to show you a couple of pages here that I thought were interesting. Not because of the Bob's Big Boy ad, but this person also stapled their ticket from that day. So there you see it right there. It looks like they bought these seats from Ticketron. So I thought I would keep that there. And I just wanted to show you some of these pictures and kind of reminded me what it was like to grow up in LA, in Hollywood, and, Hollywood Stars Night. The Dodgers still have this game where they invite, I wouldn't say the same type of stars, but they have stars show up and play a baseball game, again, with the sports writers. So here's Bob Newhart and Red Fox. Back then, he was Meathead on All in the Family, but now he's movie director Rob Reiner. Jack Lemmon, Peter Falk. And who else do we have here? Dick Martin from Laugh-In on the left, Dean Martin in the center, and Billy Barty on the right. And they had some good Hollywood stars. I remember they'd have Walter Matthau and Sinatra. It was a big deal back then. Here's a picture I thought that was interesting. I'm talking screwballs. Dodger reliever Jim Brewer with Carl Hubble. I thought that was a great shot there. And that was taken at an Old Timers game in 1973. And then here's my favorite part. This person actually kept score that day. And you could see the Cubs batting order: Rick Monday, Glenn Beckert, Billy Williams, Jose Cardinal, Ron Santo, Carmen Fanzone, Don Kessinger, Ken Rudolph, and pitcher Rick Russell. Dodgers had Davey Lopes, Bill Buckner, Willie Davis, Joe Ferguson, Willie Crawford, Steve Garvey, Ron Say, Bill Russell, and Claude Osteen. And this person kept score of the game. By the way, see the ad here? Yeah, Bill Russell. Bill Russell, the basketball player. Let's see. Speaking of ads, Willie Davis along with Don Sutton selling Sun Giant almond cards. And I think I got one more. Yeah, this one I thought you guys would like. Old Timers Day, 1973. There's Don Drysdale. Let me bring this up away from the glare. Don Drysdale, Duke Snider, Pee Wee Reese in the center. And then over here, we have kind of more of the modern Dodgers. We still have Carl Furillo, Pee Wee, Wally Moon. Down here, Stan the Man Musial was there that day. Maury Wills, that would have been his first Old Timers game. He retired in 72. And then look at this shot. Casey Stengel and Mickey Mantle. I remember this. Satchel Paige pitched that day, as did Bob Feller. And in case we needed some moral support from the cheering section, Dizzy Dean along with Lefty Grove. I mean, talk about great Old Timers days. I mean, Old Timers Day is still fun now, but it just doesn't have the same charm as it did back then. But still, I thought I would share these memories of my first baseball game. Thank you so much for indulging me. If you have memories of your first baseball game, make a video, put it in my comments. Would love to hear how your day went that day. I mentioned to you that I went to a Cleveland Indians game. It was the last game with my brother that we ever went to. And I wanted to, as a tribute, show you a video that we took that night of Hang On Sloopy. Thanks again, you guys. Have a great night.